Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Fermentation 101. My name is Dr. Lauren Pilgrim. No pill makes you grin, like Dr. Pilgrim. I am a naturopathic physician dedicated to educating and motivating others to achieve optimal health. I offer a unique perspective to general medicine and difficult to diagnose cases, which means that I really specialize in gut health and mental health, which are directly related. I chose this topic because I wanted to know more about it. And I assumed that there were a few other people out there who might be interested in the topic as well. And now, with so many of us staying at home, wondering what to do with ourselves and the kids, I thought this might be a good way to introduce a new idea, possibly create a paradigm shift, and have some fun with science along the way. Today, I am here as a facilitator, but above all, a wellness support system to assist you in any way I can. I hope to help you identify, execute, and achieve your goals. Let's get started by covering the basics. What is fermentation? Fermentation is the process of breaking down organic substances by introducing yeast or bacteria. When fermentation happens in your body, it's part of a metabolic process that produces chemical changes through the actions of enzymes. The archaic definition of fermentation is quite interesting to me. Before medical school, I was actually an English and history major, and the origins and definitions of words are still quite interesting to me. So the archaic definition of fermentation is agitation and excitement, with an example of, I had found Paris in high fermentation. But to me, this definition is the epitome of the science behind the process. What I mean is, you cannot have a scientific experiment without a little bit of excitement and agitation. In biochemistry, fermentation is defined as the extraction of energy from carbohydrates in the absence of oxygen. Fermented foods are defined as foods or beverages produced through controlled microbial growth and the conversion of food components through enzymatic action. So now what's the difference between these two pictures? Well, of course, it's controlled growth versus uncontrolled growth of microorganisms. The picture on the left is, of course, uncontrolled growth of bacteria producing an unwanted result of mold on the cheese, while the picture on the right is an example of the exact same process using controlled fermentation, using the very same bacteria to produce the desired outcome of blue cheese. Okay, so how does fermentation work? Did you know that humans are made up more of not self microbes than they are of actual human self cells? Microorganisms in your digestive system survive by using the carbohydrates you eat for fuel and energy. Outside the body, we can use the same process to break down sugar into acid and alcohol. In some cases, making it more nutritious, and in all cases, preserving it to be stored for longer without spoiling. And happy bonus, this breakdown process provides foods that come with their own enzymes, which help break it down in digestion. Essentially, when a food is fermented, it's broken down similarly to the way it would be in your gut before anyone's even consumed it. Well, that's the importance of fermented foods, right? The process of fermentation destroys many of the harmful microorganisms and chemicals in foods and adds beneficial bacteria. These bacteria produce new enzymes to assist in the digestion. Foods that benefit from fermentation include soy products, dairy products, grains, and vegetables. Before refrigeration, but after people figured out that meat would spoil, they also found ways to preserve food so that it could be stored above freezing or even refrigeration temperatures. Some things were cured with dry salt packing techniques. Some foods were canned. Some foods were pickled or stored in a saltwater brine, which is different from fermentation. And of course, some foods were fermented in order to create a longer storage life. Since the Neolithic age, people have been fermenting foods, not for the now known digestive benefits, but for the sheer practical needs of being able to store vegetables throughout the long cold winters. Some common foods that produce advantageous results from the fermentation process include sourdough bread, wine, cheese, kombucha, sauerkraut, some types of pickles, sausage, tempeh, miso, yogurt, kefir, and kimchi, although I am sure that this is not a complete list. Now, there are 3 types of fermentation that can be used on foods, so let's take a look at those. There's lactic acid fermentation. This type of fermentation happens when yeast strains and bacteria convert starches or sugars into lactic acid. Lactic acid bacteria are vital to producing and preserving inexpensive, wholesome foods, which has been extremely important for feeding impoverished cultures. The lactic acid fermentation method makes foods like sauerkraut, pickles, kimchi, yogurt, and sourdough bread. Humans undergo lactic acid fermentation when the body needs a lot of energy in a hurry. Lactic acid fermentation occurs in muscle cells. Your muscle cells can produce lactic acid to give you energy during difficult physical activities. This usually happens when there is not enough oxygen in the body, so lactic acid fermentation provides a way to get ATP, which is the body's energy, without the oxygen. So what I just said is that the human body uses fermentation to make oxygen when none is available. How cool is that? Ethyl alcohol fermentation. In this type of fermentation, yeast breaks down the molecules in starch and sugar and turns it into alcohol and carbon dioxide molecules. This type of fermentation creates wine and beer, as well as cider and hard lemonade. And vodka is also made from fermentation of grains, or preferably potatoes. Acetic acid fermentation. Starches and sugars from grains and fruit ferment into sour tasting vinegar and condiments to make things like apple cider vinegar, wine vinegar, and kombucha. So in terms of chemistry, the cider that was made from the ethyl alcohol fermentation does contain alcohol that we would drink. In the apple cider vinegar, the apple cider that had been fermented once now gets fermented a second time, and the ethanol is converted into the acetic acid, which gives us that yummy apple cider vinegar, the ACV. So probiotics versus fermented foods. Both play a role in healthy digestion, but they are not quite the same. Probiotics are defined as the good, hence the pro, bacteria in our gastrointestinal tract. In order to be called a probiotic, the food or supplement has to yield a healthy benefit to the person consuming it. Fermented foods are not regulated. They don't have to meet any standards and can contain both good and bad bacteria if they contain any live cultures at all. In a journal called The Frontiers in Microbiology, in an article called Fermented Foods as a Dietary Source of Live Organisms, they commented that many of the foods that is benefited by fermentation is also rendered inactive of live microorganisms due to a heating source primarily, but also a filtration source or other sources can take the live microorganisms out of your fermented foods. But just because your fermented foods doesn't necessarily contain any live cultures doesn't necessarily mean it is devoid of nutrients. That would be untrue. Having gone through the fermentation process, the live organisms that are now inactive have left behind enzymes and nutrients and other good things that our bodies would benefit, even if the live organisms are no longer there for consumption. The bottom line is that if you include store-bought fermented foods into your diet, you are not necessarily including probiotics. Fermenting your own foods and vegetables at home will give your daily diet a depth unparalleled by anything else that you can put in your mouth. In addition to taking a probiotic supplement, eating fermented foods can help train the immune system to tolerate and cooperate with a diverse and beneficial microbiome, says Dr. Ludwig at Harvard Medical School. Probiotics are a nutraceutical and a prescribed supplement for digestive health and have to undergo strict requirements and guidelines about what those benefits provide for the consumer. And the company providing this product must be able to recreate their results over and over and over again in order to qualify as a consumable product. Probiotics can be purchased in single strains, multiple strains, and their dosage can vary from considerably low to considerably high. And so people who just want to keep probiotics in their digestive system would go for a lower level of probably a multiple strain. And people who are experiencing more extreme cases of leaky gut and chronic digestive distress, such as Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, or general IBS, would go for a higher dose of more strains to repopulate their digestive system with some of those good bacteria, at least to help combat some of the bad bacteria that has now overgrown if the good bacteria is not populated enough. Fermented foods in your microbiome. Your microbiome is like a rainforest with multiple species of bacteria, yeast, and enzymes living together. When you have a healthy balance of yeast and bacteria in your gut, fermented foods are perfectly fine to eat because they feed the majority of good bacteria and yeast. The health benefits of probiotic-rich fermented foods can enhance the gut biome by improving digestion and boosting the immune system. The fermentation process creates an environment that allows certain good bacteria to multiply quickly. And this process produces enzymes and nutrients along with prebiotics, which feeds the probiotics that already exist in your gut and makes them stronger. If you have an imbalanced gut, however, then the fermented foods can feed the bad bacteria, creating an overpopulation of those bad bacteria, and that can lead to even more problems. So in many cases, when you implement a strategy, if it's not the correct one for you, in many cases, it just won't help. And in a lot of cases, it certainly won't hurt. In this case, however, if you implement the wrong system, if you implement fermented foods into your system and your body is already one that tends towards bloating and gaseous states, then you're going to increase those bloating and gaseous states, which will make you more uncomfortable and less inclined to do this in the future. So if you are already gassy and bloated, I would suggest that you take care of those problems before pursuing your interest in fermented foods. Not only will fermented foods help your digestive tract if you are already close to balanced, but they can also improve your mental health as well. Your gut and brain have a close relationship known in the medical field as the gut-brain axis. 90% of your serotonin, the happiness hormone, is produced in the gut. This is a widely studied connection, and there is always research coming out about how the foods we eat can affect our mental health. If you live with mental issues like anxiety or depression, staying up to date with the research in this field could improve your overall health and your quality of life. Tips for grocery shopping. When choosing pickled fermented veggies at the store, make sure that the jar or package says raw and unpasteurized or lacto-fermented. I'm going to repeat that. Make sure that the package says raw and unpasteurized or lacto-fermented. That way you know the good bacteria are still alive and ready to populate your gut. An article from the Harvard Women's Health Watch called Fermented Foods Can Add Depth to Your Diet says that to ensure that the fermented foods you choose do contain probiotics, look for the words naturally fermented on the label, and when you open the jar, look for the telltale bubbles in the liquid, which signal that the live organisms are inside the jar. Again, this is from Dr. Ludwig, who is a professor of nutrition at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. That would be the Harvard Medical School. Okay, and so to make kombucha, it's typically made from a SCOBY, which is an acronym that stands for Symbiotic Colony of Bacteria and Yeast. So kombucha is made from a SCOBY, a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, and mixed with sweetened tea. This has been around for more than 2,000 years and is beloved for its B vitamins, its probiotic bacteria, and its tangy flavor. Pickling and fermenting are sometimes confused with each other, but are distinctly different. The pickling process preserves food in a brine, which is salt or salty water, and an acid like vinegar. The lacto-fermentation process preserves food with bacteria without the use of milk. These veggies can be stacked in sandwiches, tossed in a salad, chopped up and folded into spreads and dips, or just used all by themselves as a healthy, yummy snack. Whipping up some homemade mason jar sauerkraut is actually not difficult, and I will provide a link to a recipe if this intrigues you with tomorrow's email that will come out with the link to today's webinar, the recording to today's webinar. So homemade sauerkraut then traditionally is great on hot dogs, sandwiches, potatoes, but really again the choice is yours and the sky is the limit. Miso is made from fermented soybeans and is packed with yummy salty flavor that can be used for so much more than just soup. Again, I will provide links to recipes for ways that miso can be used. So the next time that you're at the store and you're feeling adventurous, grab a tub of miso and try some of those recipes. Being a beet lover myself, this beet kvass multi-purpose tonic is one that I am looking forward to experimenting with. And in my little bit of research, I found that it is used in vinaigrettes or even just eaten on its own. But who wouldn't want to eat that lovely mixture of pickled fermented beets and onions? If fermented foods do end up causing you to be more gassy and bloated, then FODMAP would be to blame. FODMAP is another acronym, and it stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and of course polysaccharides. Saccharides are foods that contain carbohydrates that are fermented more rapidly in the gut and can therefore cause more rapid gas production, which would cause you to have larger stabs of pain, bigger spikes of pain, to definitely be bloated and to retain that gaseous state for longer periods of time. If you suffer from issues like bloating or gas, eating foods that are high in this FODMAP can make your symptoms worse. So this would be one of the reasons that you would want to take care of that bloating and gassy problem before introducing fermented foods into your diet. If you are having gut issues, try and limit your intake of fermented foods until you restore a healthy balance of good bacteria to your microbiome. Start with small amounts and cut back if you feel any discomfort. So again, as I've been saying, if you are tending towards gassy and bloated states, fermented foods would not be the place for you to start. So we've covered a lot of ground today. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. I will give you that information here. But I want to go ahead and make sure that these resources are made available to you here in my shared screen. So here I'll go ahead and leave this up for a moment so you can take a screenshot of info about fermented foods and ways that fermented foods heal your body and mind. Here's another link to fermented foods low on FODMAP. Another one for IBS food triggers, so foods that trigger IBS. And of course, just general recipes. I hope that you paused and took screenshots along the way as you need to. And thank you all for joining me today. Again, my name is Dr. Lauren Pilgrim, the Center of Balance Clinic in Sedona, Arizona. We can be reached at 928-203-4200, 928-203-4200. We can also be reached at info@thecenterofbalanceclinic.com, which is also our website, thecenterofbalanceclinic.com. Please feel free to reach out for us if you have any questions, comments, and certainly if you'd like to take advantage of any of the services we offer. Thank you again for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you at the next live event.